starting by talking about why I wrote the book, what inspired me to write this book, and about the importance of caring and how caring is wired in us, and that there are people who care too much and they get exhausted. There are people who were hurt and maybe start becoming avoidant and become indifferent. And in my last kind of thought was about the isolation that comes from no longer caring, which is one of the great hidden epidemics of our time. And then there is a particular form of this question that I hear more and more from younger people. What I think of as a new generation gap. The new generation are exposed through their phones to a volume of suffering no previous generation has had to absorb. Wars, famines, climate emergencies, the suffering of strangers in every corner of the world, every day, before breakfast. And they look around and ask, why should I care? If no one else seems to be caring enough to change anything. That question deserves an honest answer, and the book tries to give it an honest answer. I also kept being asked by readers of my previous book and my previous work and in conferences, does the universe itself care? Is there any structure of reality that holds caring as something real? Or are we alone in caring in a cosmos that is indifferent to us? That question is the deepest one of all. And the book takes it seriously, drawing on what I have spent, I would say, the good part of 50 years on the science of consciousness and the Vedic traditions, ancient philosophies and tradition and beliefs, trying to understand what consciousness is, how we make decisions, and how this impacts our life and our growth and what is needed in order to have a fulfilling life. So the most important reason, anyway, I wrote this book, I could say is this. Conscious caring is actually a technique. It is not just a feeling. It is not just a moral attitude. It is a way of living that can be learned, practiced, and refined, like meditation, like an art, like a craft. And when it is practiced consciously, it leads somewhere specific. It leads to what, for example, the Greeks called, Aristotle and others, eudaimonia, which is a deeply lived life, a life that is meaningful, that is deeply lived, a life of flourishing, a life of lasting fulfillment that does not come from impulse or from stress-driven obligation or from just performance of caring on social media, but from the inner alignment of consciously, intentionally living the way we actually want to live. Conscious caring is, in that sense, an art of living. And like any art, it can be learned. That is what I wanted to put down in this book. A practical guide to caring well, sustainably, wisely, across the whole of a life. I will now read the introduction to you. I wrote it almost 2 years ago. It says at the entrance to the book, everything I most wanted to say. And so, in that feeling of caring and wholeness, let's sit comfortably and listen to the introduction, which actually gives, in few words, a lot of words. Actually, it might take 15 minutes or so to read, but it gives the idea about the book, about the feeling in the book, the writing in the book, how it is built in a sense, and what to expect from it. So instead of me saying these things like this, I think we thought that reading the introduction is really the best way to do it. So thank you for being here and for listening. And the introduction has a title. The title is The Question That Cuts Through Everything. And that question is, who cares? Who cares? It can be the ultimate brush off, muttered with a shrug, when the conversation drifts toward a trivial complaint or the latest social media outrage. It can also be the most important question in the world, whispered through tears at 3 a.m. when you wonder if what you're doing matters at all. Same words, completely different worlds. I've asked who cares both ways. Sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with my heart in my throat. As a young doctor, I once sat beside a patient in the early hours of the morning. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. The hallway outside was quiet in that strange way hospitals get at 3 a.m., suspended between exhaustion and emergency. He was in his late 50s, strong hands, callous palms, a man who looked like he'd worked hard all his life. But that night he was afraid, not theatrically afraid, just quietly, unmistakably afraid. The man in the bed was just a few years older than I was. His diagnosis had just shifted from concerning to serious. He didn't ask about statistics. He didn't want medical jargon. He kept asking the same question in different forms. Am I going to be okay? Will I see my children grow up? Did I miss something? Is this my fault? In that moment, caring wasn't optional. It wasn't a professional obligation or a moral theory. It was the only thing that made sense. The science mattered, the protocol mattered, but what mattered most was presence. Sitting there long enough for the fear in the room to soften. And yet, I also remember walking down hospital corridors, telling myself, don't care too much, or you won't last. Because if you let every fear enter you fully, if you carry every family's worry home with you, something begins to fray. You learn quickly that empathy without boundaries can hollow you out. Both impulses are human. Care too little and life feels flat. Care too much and it can break you. How we navigate that tension shapes everything: our health, our relationships, our work, our politics, even our sense of purpose. This book isn't a guide for saints or superheroes. It's for real humans, people who sometimes hold the door for strangers and sometimes pretend not to see the shopping cart rolling towards someone else's car. It's about learning to give a damn wisely. And there is something we rarely pause to consider. On a still morning, you toss a pebble into a lake, but imagine it's not water you're touching. It's the invisible web that connects every life around you. The water ripples outward, soft rings expanding in perfect circles, until they touch the far shore. You can't control exactly where each ring will end up, but you know this. Something in that lake remains completely still. Nothing in that lake remains completely still once the pebble hits. Caring works the same way. Every word, every reaction, every act of restraint or generosity sends out rings. Some are visible immediately, Others travel quietly through relationships, communities, even generations. We'll return to this ripple idea throughout the book, because caring doesn't just affect the moment, it echoes forward, backward, and sideways through time. Once you drop a stone, the lake is never quite the same. The question is not whether you create ripples. You do. The question is what kind? Why caring feels hard right now? If caring were simple, you wouldn't need this book. We live in an age of constant exposure. Every day brings headlines that feel urgent, tragic, or enraging. Social media amplifies outrage. Algorithms reward conflict. The problems facing humanity, climate instability, inequality, polarization, technological acceleration, feel planetary in scale. At the same time, our personal lives are faster and more demanding than ever. Work follows us home. Notifications follow us into bed. The nervous system rarely rests. Under these conditions, caring can begin to feel impossible. We either care about everything and burn out, care selectively and feel guilty, or protect ourselves by numbing out. Compassion fatigue isn't limited to hospitals or crisis zones anymore. It is cultural. And yet something in us refuses to stop caring entirely. We are wired for connection. Even the most cynical among us still react when a child drops an ice cream cone or when someone is treated unjustly. So the real question isn't whether we care. It's how to care in a way that is sustainable, intelligent, and aligned with reality. This book does not ask you to care more. It asks you to care better. The journey we're about to take. The power of caring unfolds in stages. We begin by examining why we care at all, biologically, psychologically, philosophically. What is happening in the brain when we feel empathy? Why does fairness matter so deeply? Why do we sometimes protect ourselves by withdrawing? Then we look at what we choose to care about: ourselves, our families, strangers, systems, the planet. We examine how our attention becomes our moral currency. Next, we confront the shadow side: burnout, overextension, selective caring, control disguised as help. Caring is powerful, but power always casts a shadow. From there, we move into daily life: work, money, education, the body, crisis. We explore how the structures that shape our lives can either drain our care or amplify it. Finally, we widen the arc: ethics, beauty, spiritual life, the future of humanity, and the deeper question of purpose. We ask whether caring is merely a social behavior or something woven into the fabric of reality itself. This isn't a straight line upward. It's more like a spiral. Each part refines the last, like ripples overlapping, reinforcing, reshaping the surface. How to use the book. Each chapter follows a rhythm, a story to ground the ideas in lived experience, a lens, scientific, philosophical, or practical, a quick reset, A brief exercise to anchor insight into the body and mind. Reflection questions to make the material personal rather than abstract. A takeaway, a distilled principle you can carry into daily life. You can read straight through, or you can pause after a quick reset, or revisit specific chapters as life demands. This is not a book to rush, it's a book to practice with. You don't need to agree with every idea to benefit from it. You only need curiosity and the willingness to examine how you're living your own answer to who cares. The consciousness paradigm. Over decades of study and research, I've become convinced that there is only one fundamental reality, a non-physical field of consciousness, from which all diversity emerges. I explored this more fully in my book, Consciousness is All There Is, where I describe how a unified field of pure awareness appears as multiplicity, manifesting as the forces, matter, and structures of the physical universe. This view draws on philosophical reasoning, in particular Vedanta as brought to light by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as well as suggestive insights from modern physics, empirical research on meditation, and lived experience. In this book, I refer to this perspective as the consciousness paradigm, which I describe in Appendix A. From this view, there aren't two separate substances, mind and matter, but one underlying field expressing itself in countless forms. Everything you see, hear, touch, and even think is consciousness perceiving itself from different angles, like a novelist imagining endless characters and plot lines. If that sounds abstract, stay with me. The practical implication is surprisingly concrete. In a unified field, every action ripples through the whole and returns, not because a cosmic judge is keeping score, but because reality balances itself automatically. Physics tells us every action has an equal and opposite reaction. In a consciousness-based universe, something similar operates at deeper levels. Planned kindness and coherence grows. Planned harm and turbulence spreads. Delay does not mean escape. The lake remembers the pebble. The implication is profound. What you do to others is, in a very real sense, what you do to yourself. Caring, then, is not merely moral preference. It is alignment with how reality works. A word on Transcendental Meditation, and here is a paragraph where I describe the importance of Transcendental Meditation. And then there is a title called The Twist in the Question. Here is where who cares takes on an unexpected twist. In the consciousness paradigm, caring isn't just something nice people do. It is built into the structure of existence itself. If there is only one field of awareness expressing as many, then caring is the self recognizing itself in another form. This rephrases everything. Caring for the planet becomes self-preservation. Caring for future generations becomes caring across time. Caring for your own body becomes tending the first home of consciousness. Even learning when not to care, when to ignore noise, release judgment, or remain undisturbed by unfair criticism, becomes part of intelligent alignment. Care responds to reality, not to every passing disturbance. The question shifts from, should I care? To, how can I participate wisely in a universe already moving toward balance. What you may consider. By the end of this journey, you may find greater clarity about what you genuinely care about, stronger boundaries around what drains you, a renewed sense of agency in small daily acts, a wider horizon that connects your life to something larger. You may also discover that the one doing the caring, the you assume is separate, is part of something far more unified than it appears. So we return to the question, who cares? Let's find out. So this is the introduction. I skipped the part on transcendental meditation. Many know about it, but it's a profound technique that allows the fullness of consciousness to expand. It transcends the surface values of life, the ripples on the surface of the ocean, and takes us to the ocean itself, which we discover we are, and we are beyond those only waves and surface values. And that allows us to make decisions and care about things from the most profound and complete level, which is conscious caring. And transcendental meditation is also explained in the book. I see there is a question. Thank you for listening so far. And I guess the question, if I look at it diagonally, it says, that it's about caring for an elderly mother or an elderly person, or caring in general. And the question that Anna's asking is, I'm caring for my elderly mother, who I love deeply. I'm getting very tired. You talk about caring better. What do you mean, and how do I do it? So this is a question I receive often, even though the book is not about caretakers, although caretakers are at the heart of it. It covers caring in general in life, but this is the caretakers, the doctors during COVID who took care of patients, the nurses, the hospital staff, and who got overwhelmed and who benefited so much from transcendental meditation. But this is a question I also receive in general often, and I want to honor the seriousness of it. The first thing I want to say to you is that the exhaustion you are feeling is not a moral failure. It is not a sign that you love your mother less. If anything, it is a sign of how much you love her, and a sign that you have been giving from a reservoir that is unfortunately running low. When the book talks about caring better, it means something specific. It is not about caring more. You are already caring at full capacity. The question is what you are caring from. Right now, much of your caring is probably coming from a place of urgency, anxiety, and the constant low-grade fear of something going wrong. That kind of caring depletes the system within months. It is the most common pattern I see in adult child caregivers, and it is not your failing. It is what happens when a person of love is asked to carry more than one human being can carry alone. And here the difference is between caring and carrying. The body has a limit how much it can carry, even though the mind wants to care maximum. Caring better for you starts with three things. First, a daily practice that returns you to yourself. Even few minutes of silence in the morning. Say before your mother needs anything, before the day begins. Same time, same chair, no phone. This is not a luxury. It is the inner ground that all the rest of the day's caring will be drawn from. Without it, the well runs dry. So, of course, if you practice transcendental meditation, make sure you do it and do it regularly at the start of the day. And then at the end of the day, towards the end of the day, also take some time before dinner to sit down and meditate, transcend, go beyond. And going beyond is pulling the arrow back so it hits the target profoundly. And that's the power of transcendental meditation that gives us the ability to act from a settled state. If you don't practice transcendental meditation, you can learn it, of course, which is great, or even take a few minutes of silent sitting, even 5 minutes, at least to disconnect from the outer anxiety and problems that are there. So this is actually number one. Second, the question I keep coming back to in the book, and it's very important. What is mine to do today? And what is not mine to do today? Some of what you are doing for your mother is genuinely yours. The love, the presence, the daily companionship. Some of what you are doing is not necessarily yours and never was. For example, the medical decisions you should not be making alone. The household work you do not have to do alone. The emotional care your mother also needs from others, not only from you. Be honest about both lists that you can make. Third, let other people help. This is usually the hardest one. The cultural script of a devoted daughter says, you do it all. The reality is that no human being can do it all without breaking. Whether it is a sibling, a paid caregiver, a few hours a week, a community organization, your faith community, find one source of help and accept it this week, not later. This week. The deepest thing I would say to you is this. Your mother does not need a depleted you. She needs a present you. The version of you that can hold her hand for an hour and actually be there. To get there, you have to take care of you. That is not selfish. It is the precise opposite. It is the only way the love you have for her can keep being given fully and gently for as long as she needs. I have another question here from Adam. Thank you, Adam, for being here and your interest and the difference between caring and compassion. So the question is, what is the difference? As simple as that. What is the difference between caring and compassion? And this is a beautiful question. And I want to draw the distinction carefully because they are related, although not the same. And compassion, even if we want to go to its etymology, where does it come from? It comes from Latin, cum pati. Cum pati means cum is together with, and pati is actually to suffer. So compassion is to suffer with, in a sense. And it is the feeling that arises in us when we see another person in pain. Usually we call this empathy. See, there are mirror neurons in our brain, which when we see somebody suffering, or in pain, our brain actually starts activating the same neuronal mechanisms that are activated when that person is also suffering or having pain. And that influences our body, our functions, our hormones, our electrical activity in the brain. That is empathy. So empathy feels. Compassion feels also in the same way, but it also sees. And the heart moves. The eyes fill. We are pulled into resonance with the suffering of the other. So compassion is fundamentally a feeling. Caring is something different. Caring is an active orientation. It is the choice to take responsibility for the well-being of another. Of course, yes, it involves feeling, but it also involves action, attention, and a sustained commitment over time. Caring is what happens when compassion does not stop at the feeling, but moves into the world and changes something. In the ancient traditions, let's say in the Veda, in Buddhism, the Vedic tradition, there is a word for compassion, which is called karuna. It is highly honored as a noble feeling, but it is also recognized as one moment of a larger, we can say, arc. And the arc completes when karuna becomes service or seva, when the feeling becomes the deed. Both come from the same root. They are both expressions of consciousness recognizing itself in another consciousness, of the underlying unity becoming visible to itself. But they have different functions. Compassion opens us. Caring moves us. The first softens the heart. The second uses the softened heart to do something about it. And why the distinction matters? It matters because compassion alone can become a trap. We can spend our lives feeling deeply for the suffering of the world, maybe without ever lifting a finger to address it. That is not deep, true love. That is a kind of indulgence in our own emotional responsiveness. The person who suffers does not benefit from our tears. They benefit from our action. I often take the example, you have somebody sitting there in pain or in emotional distress, and they are crying. And somebody comes and sits next to them and starts crying with them. Now, we had one person crying, now we have two people crying. Fine, the compassion is there. Compassion feels and sees. Conscious caring acts. And in order to act, you have to replenish yourself, you have to be stronger, you have to be happy, you have to be knowing what you're doing, assess your situation, what else can you do, what can be done. That is conscious caring. And then you can help the other and lift them out of their pain or suffering. It matters because compassion alone can lead to what the field general discussion of even psychology calls compassion fatigue. Because the burnout that comes from feeling again and again without the relief of doing is leading to this overwhelm and tiredness. So the compassionate person who never acts is at high risk of actually breaking. The caring person who acts as well as feels has the relief of motion, even physiologically, physically. The energy of compassion gets discharged into the world, and the system can then refill. So they are related, they share a root, and we need both. But if I had to choose one to live by, I would choose caring. Compassion without caring is, in a sense, sentimentality. Caring without compassion is also grim duty. But caring with compassion is the full thing, the whole thing. The heart that feels joined to the hands that act. That is the human capacity at its most beautiful level. Also, caring expands beyond people that are suffering or have a problem. You might care for people who are well, who are doing well. You care for them, you give them something more. So you can't say you're caring for somebody who's healthy and happy. Yes, you can do that. You can care for them. You can help them make the right choices, inspire them, make them make decisions for supporting programs that help others, guide them into making decisions that bring happiness in society. So you would not call this compassion, because how can you be compassionate for somebody who seems to be quite okay? Yet you can care. So you can care for, your child if you're a parent, and the child might be growing and happy, and you still care for them, to educate them, to guide them, to make them conscious, to make them look at life and grow in it. So that conscious caring is a more encompassing level of actually deciding about what we do in a conscious way. After all, we care for so many things. We care to breathe. It happens automatically. We care to eat. We care to have fun. We care to enjoy life. This is not, in the category of compassion anymore. So caring covers a much broader perspective. So I don't know about time, but there is one question. Let me abort, go for it, even if maybe it's a little longer than we thought. And that's very nice. It's coming from David, and it asks, from, your last book, Consciousness is All There Is, it was about something more academic. And this new book, The Power of Caring, is very human and relatable. What led you to go from a more academic approach of the consciousness paradigm to caring? And I want to thank you for this question. It is one I have thought about a great deal. Of course, Consciousness is All There Is a foundation. It lays out the philosophical and scientific case for understanding consciousness as the fundamental ground of reality, not as a byproduct of brain activity. So I had to first present the worldview that I have understood from Maharishi, from my work and my experience, and from scientific research, to put caring on a platform that is consistent and makes sense. So the first book, therefore, is like the science of being. And our dear Bob Ross, who is the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation, actually in one of the conferences, came up with a nice and interesting comparison. He said, Maharishi wrote the book, The Science of Being and Art of Living. And the science of being is consciousness is all there is, explained in modern terms with modern discoveries about science, the latest that has come up, how we can understand this as the science of being with the latest discoveries in neuroscience and quantum physics, in ancient traditions, and contemporary, even analytic philosophy of mind. And it is necessarily a little bit more of a demanding read. And without thinking about it, I thought about the book, but without thinking about this comparison, I wrote The Power of Caring. And Bob said, it looks like this is the art of living, which is the part where the knowledge of understanding what life is about, what is our worldview, why we are here, the purpose of it, etc., is applied in actual things. And if the first book is the metaphysical foundation, then after I finished it, I realized something that actually in a sense, troubled me a little bit. I had laid out an enormous architecture, a complete view of what reality actually is. And I had not yet shown what difference any of it makes for the way a person actually lives their life on a Tuesday, on a Monday afternoon. The book ends with the conclusion that the consciousness is fundamental, but the reader is then left to ask, okay, and what, so what? Of course, I do give general guidelines about meditation and understanding life, but the question of what do I do with this on Friday evening or Thursday morning? That was the impulse, as we discussed from the beginning of the book, why I wrote the book, but it's one of the impulses for the power of caring. I wanted to take the metaphysics and bring it all the way down to the level of daily life. Because if consciousness is one, if the awareness through which I see you is the same awareness through which you see me, then the most direct and practical consequence of that act lived in daily life is actually caring. Caring for ourselves, caring for each other, caring for the world we share. Caring as a natural activity of consciousness, aware of its own unity. That is what the new book is about. It is actually the metaphysics, we can say, made operational. It's much simpler to read. It is on day-to-day activity, on day-to-day concerns. It has very practical implications, and the philosophical architecture expressed at the level of how a person treats their elderly mother, how a parent raises their child, how a friend shows up in a moment of grief, how a society organizes its institutions, how we relate to the natural world. There is also a personal reason. I dedicated the book to the generation that's coming up. My daughters are also part of this generation, and to them and to the generations is an important thing. Those who are coming of age now. I wanted to leave them something, not another academic treatise, something they could actually use as they grow into a world that is going to ask more of them than any prior generation. Something warm, practical, and honest. And that extends to all of us, because even as we grow in age and mature, the world we're living in today is so dramatically different than what we have ever seen before. You know, today a teenager comes up, and within the few years they have lived on this earth, they have been exposed to so much more than their grandparents have been exposed to in their entire life, in terms of ideas, differences, structures of communities, politics, etc., 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 events that are happening everywhere. So, to go back to the two books, they are not really separate projects. They are two halves of one project. Consciousness is all there is makes the case for the framework. The power of caring shows what living from that framework looks like in real time, in real relationships, in real life. One is the why, the other is the how. I think the academic conversation and the human conversation need each other. The academy needs to remember why it is doing the work, for whom, toward what end. And ordinary life needs the rigor that the academy brings, so that the daily wisdom is not just folklore, but has a real foundation underneath it. So I wanted in this book to honor both, to write something that any reader can pick up and use immediately, but that also rests quietly on a metaphysical foundation that has been carefully thought through over many, many decades. So the journey from the first book to the second is, I hope, the journey from understanding to embodiment, from the recognition to the practice, from knowing to living. That is why this book exists. And thank you very much. We took longer time. For those who stayed with us, the book is coming out in July, and it can be pre-ordered already at thepowerofcaringbook.com. And I hope you participate in our many webinars. There is one coming up on June 14th. Its title is going to be about love, loss, and relationships that are discussed in the book. The first webinar is also there, happened almost a month ago, and it was about caring across political divides. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your questions. The book, again, is The Power of Caring, available wherever books are sold as a pre-sale. If anything you heard tonight landed in a particular place, trust it. Begin where you are, care for yourself, care for someone today, and the rest follows.